David Grant stood awkwardly in a room that smelled of lemon polish and old money, the soft carpet a world away from the broken pavement he called home. A woman with tears in her eyes was clutching his rough, calloused hand, while the most powerful man in the city stood beside her, promising that David's life was about to change forever. He didn't know he was being filmed. He didn't know his face was already all over the news. He only knew that a single, simple choice made just hours earlier had led him to this unbelievable moment. But what was that choice? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The transition from that surreal, polished room back to the biting reality of the present was a jolt that happened every morning. For David Grant, a man of 55 years, the day began not with an alarm clock, but with the gradual fading of warmth. His makeshift shelter, a lean, two of scavenged cardboard and a discarded tarp, was strategically placed behind the exhaust vents of a 24-hour bakery. The air that puffed out, thick with the scent of sugar and yeast, was his only shield against the damp chill of an Atlanta dawn. He woke slowly, his body a roadmap of aches. A chronic fire burned in his lower back, a souvenir from a life of hard labor, now aggravated by years of sleeping on even harder ground. He moved with a deliberate, methodical grace, a routine honed by necessity. First, he folded his single thin blanket, smoothing it with a care that seemed almost reverent. It, along with a spare pair of socks, a half-used bar of soap, and a worn paperback, went into a tattered backpack that never left his side. Each item had its place, a small pocket of order in a life defined by chaos. As the city stirred to life, David became a master of invisibility. He was a ghost haunting the periphery of other people's urgent lives. Men in sharp suits and women in clicking heels rushed past, their eyes fixed on phones or the promise of a morning latte, their gazes sliding right over the gray, bearded man who stood with a quiet stillness that was its own form of defiance. He didn't panhandle, he didn't shout, he simply existed, a silent observer of the urban tide. This practiced anonymity was his armor. It protected him from the casual cruelty of pity and the sharp sting of disgust. Yet, in the quiet moments, the isolation was a physical weight. He felt like a stone at the bottom of a rushing river, the current of humanity flowing over and around him, oblivious to his presence. He wasn't looking for sympathy, he was just trying to survive until the sun went down, and then survive the night that followed. Sometimes, a smell or a sound would snag on a loose thread of memory. The scent of freshly cut lumber from a nearby construction site would suddenly transport him back 2 decades. He'd see his own hands, younger and stronger, guiding a piece of oak through a table saw. He could almost feel the sturdy workbench beneath his palms, smell the sweet, dusty perfume of sawdust, and hear the satisfying hum of a well-oiled machine. In that life, he had been a creator, a man who built things, a man with a name and a purpose. Now, he was a ghost, haunted by the faint outlines of the man he used to be. Later that day, the afternoon sun offered little warmth, a pale, watery light that did nothing to soften the edges of the city. A cold wind, carrying the scent of rain and exhaust, bit at any exposed skin, snaking its way through the threadbare fabric of David's jacket. He was on Peachtree Street, a canyon of glass and steel where the city's starkest contrasts were on full display. Luxury cars with tinted windows purred past homeless men pushing shopping carts laden with their worldly possessions. The frantic energy of commerce coexisted with the slow, grinding pace of poverty. David had found a spot near a bus stop, a small alcove that offered a sliver of protection from the wind. He was engaged in his daily habit of people, watching, a passive form of entertainment that cost nothing. He saw the hurried, the stressed, the joyful, and the weary, a silent audience to 1,000 tiny dramas, and then he saw it. It was lying on the grimy sidewalk, just a few feet from the curb, looking as out of place as a diamond in a dustbin. It was a purse, but not just any purse. It was crafted from a deep burgundy leather, the color of old wine, so smooth and supple it seemed to glow even in the weak light. A small, elegant gold clasp gleamed, catching the sun for a brief moment. It was pristine, without a single scuff or mark, an object of obvious expense and care. It looked as though someone had set it down for a second, perhaps to dig for a transit card or answer a phone, and had simply walked away. David's first instinct was to do nothing. He watched it, his eyes scanning the crowd. Surely, someone would come rushing back, their face a mask of panic. He saw a woman hurry past, then a group of students, then a man talking loudly into his phone. None of them gave the purse a second glance. Minutes stretched on. The bus arrived with a hiss of air brakes, swallowed a group of people, and pulled away. The purse remained. A strange feeling began to stir in David's chest, a pull of responsibility. It was a valuable thing, a piece of someone's life, and it was in danger of being lost for good, kicked into the gutter or snatched by someone with less complicated intentions. He pushed himself to his feet, his joints protesting, and cautiously approached it. He bent down, his calloused fingers making contact with the impossibly smooth leather. It was heavy, substantial. The texture was a shock to his system, a tactile memory from a world he no longer inhabited. He couldn't just stand there on the sidewalk, a homeless man holding a purse that was worth more than everything he owned combined. The stares were already beginning, a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. He clutched it to his chest and retreated into the relative privacy of a nearby alley, a narrow space between two buildings that smelled of damp brick and garbage. His heart was pounding, a frantic drumbeat against his ribs, a mixture of fear and a strange, unfamiliar adrenaline. With trembling hands, he found the gold clasp and clicked it open. The interior was lined with a soft, cream-colored fabric. The first thing he saw was a wallet, thick and overflowing. He slid it out. It was made of the same burgundy leather as the purse. He unsnapped it, and his breath caught in his throat. Inside was a thick wedge of cash. He quickly, almost guiltily, counted it. There were crisp $100 bills, 20s, 10s. It amounted to nearly $800. His hands began to shake in earnest now. The smell of the leather, mixed with a faint, expensive perfume that lingered inside the purse, filled his senses, an aroma of a life of comfort and ease. His mind, so long occupied with the simple, brutal calculus of survival, suddenly flooded with possibilities. The money was a key, a temporary escape from the cage of his reality. He could see it all with a startling clarity. A week, maybe two, in a cheap motel on the edge of town, a real bed with clean sheets, a hot shower that lasted longer than 5 minutes, the steam fogging up a mirror. He imagined walking into a store and buying a new pair of boots, ones without holes in the soles that let the cold seep in. He could taste a steak dinner, the sizzle of the meat, the simple dignity of sitting at a table and being served. It was more than just food or shelter. It was a brief return to normalcy, a chance to feel like a person again, to buy what he needed instead of waiting for it to be given. The cash in his hands represented a short, blissful vacation from the constant, grinding hardship that had been his life for so long. As he held the money, the crisp bills feeling alien in his rough hands, another image surfaced, pushing through the fog of desperate desire. It was a memory from a lifetime ago, so vivid it was almost a hallucination. He was a boy, no older than 10, standing in his father's workshop. His father, a stern but fair man with hands as tough as old leather, was looking down at him, his eyes serious. "A man is only as good as his word," his father had said, his voice a low rumble, "and his actions when no one is watching. That's when you find out who you really are, son." The memory was a cornerstone of a life he thought he had lost completely, a moral foundation buried under years of failure and shame. The voice was as clear as if his father were standing right there in the alley with him. His gaze fell back to the wallet. He slid the cash back into its slot and saw the clear plastic window of the driver's license holder. A woman's face smiled out at him. She had kind eyes and a warm, genuine smile. Karen Whitmore. An address on a street he knew was in one of the wealthiest parts of the city. A name. A person. This wasn't just forgotten money. It was her money. It belonged to her life, her world. The fierce temptation that had gripped him just moments before began to fade, replaced by a quiet, unshakable resolve. He carefully placed the wallet back inside the purse, nestled it beside a phone and a set of keys, and clicked the gold clasp shut. The decision was made. Zipping his thin jacket up to his chin against the relentless wind, David Grant stepped out of the alley and began the long walk to the Central Police Precinct. The purse felt heavy in his hands now, not with the weight of money, but with the undeniable weight of his choice. The doors to the Central Police Precinct hissed open and shut, swallowing David into a world of harsh, artificial light and noise. The air was a stale cocktail of industrial disinfectant, burnt coffee, and the faint, metallic scent of fear. Phones rang with shrill insistence. Voices echoed off the linoleum floors and cinder-block walls, and a constant, low hum from the fluorescent lights overhead vibrated in his teeth. It was an environment designed for processing problems, not people, and David felt every nerve in his body tense. He approached the high front counter, a formidable barrier of scratched wood and cloudy plexiglass. Behind it, a uniformed officer was slumped in his chair, his shoulders rounded in a permanent posture of weary resignation. The nameplate on his desk read Russo. He was a man buried under a mountain of paperwork, his gaze fixed on a report, his pen scratching with irritable energy. He didn't look up. "What do you want?" Officer Russo asked, his voice flat and devoid of curiosity. "If you're looking for a place to sleep, the shelters are on the other side of town. We're full up on lost tourists and domestic disputes tonight." David said nothing. He simply lifted the heavy burgundy purse and placed it on the counter. It landed with a soft, expensive thud, a sound so out of place in the station's cacophony that it seemed to momentarily silence the room. The sound made Russo finally lift his head, his expression of annoyance slowly morphing into one of guarded surprise. His eyes, cynical and tired, took in the pristine leather, the gleaming gold clasp, and then traveled up to David's weathered face and threadbare jacket. The suspicion was immediate, a reflex honed by years of seeing the worst of the city. "Where'd you get that?" Russo asked, his tone sharpening. "I found this," David said, his voice quiet but steady. "By the bus stop on Peachtree." Russo's eyes narrowed. He reached out and pulled the purse towards him, his movements slow and deliberate. He picked it up, testing its weight, his eyebrows raising slightly. He fumbled with the unfamiliar clasp for a second before it clicked open. He peered inside, and the first thing he saw was the thick wallet. He pulled it out, and upon opening it, the wedge of cash made him let out a low whistle. He glanced at David again, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before his professional instincts took over. He began searching for identification. He found the driver's license, slid it from its plastic sleeve, and read the name. The change was instantaneous and profound. Officer Russo's entire body language shifted. He sat up straight, the slump in his shoulders vanishing. The cynical mask he wore cracked and fell away, replaced by an expression of wide-eyed alertness. "Karen Whitmore," he breathed, the name barely a whisper. He looked at the address, a prestigious lane in a neighborhood he knew was home to the city's elite. He knew exactly who this was. He looked from the smiling face on the ID to the homeless man standing silently before him, and back again. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a revelation. "You just found this?" he asked, his voice now laced with a respect that bordered on awe. David simply nodded, the gesture small but definite. Russo swallowed hard, his mind racing. This wasn't just a lost purse, it was a situation. A major one. He reached for the phone, his hand moving with a newfound urgency, his gaze fixed on David as if seeing him for the first time. At that exact moment, in an elegant, modern home filled with abstract art and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a manicured garden, a very different kind of drama was unfolding. Karen Whitmore was moving through the spacious living room with a frantic energy, her initial annoyance blossoming into full-blown panic. She yanked cushions off the cream-colored sofa, ran her hands down the sides of armchairs, and patted the pockets of the coat she had worn earlier for the 10th time. "I can't find it anywhere," she exclaimed, her voice tight with anxiety. "My purse. Richard, we have to go back." Mayor Richard Whitmore sat at a large glass desk, a pool of light from a sleek lamp illuminating a stack of documents. He looked up, his expression one of mild distraction. "Karen, relax," he said, his tone meant to be soothing but coming across as slightly patronizing. "It's probably in the car. You're always misplacing it. Remember the gala last month?" "No, Richard, this is different," she insisted, turning to face him, her hands twisting together. "I know it's not in the car. I remember it so clearly. I set it down on the bench at the bus stop when I was looking for my transit card. I was flustered, trying to find the right change for that vendor, and I just walked away. My whole life is in there." The mayor sighed, still not grasping the depth of her distress. "It's a purse, darling, We can cancel the credit cards. The cash is unfortunate, but it's not the end of the world." Tears welled in Karen's eyes, born of frustration and a deeper, more personal sense of loss. "It's not about the money, Richard. Don't you understand?" Her voice trembled. The picture of my mother is in there." She sank onto the edge of the sofa, her frantic energy deflating into despair. "It's that little one, the worn one from the 1970s, the one she gave me just before she passed. It's in the little side pocket. It's the only one I have." The photograph was a small, square image with faded color and frayed edges, a tangible piece of a woman she missed every single day. It was her most precious, secret possession, a direct link to her own past, and the thought of it being lost in the city's grimy shuffle was unbearable. Seeing her genuine anguish, the way her shoulders shook, finally broke through the mayor's bubble of political preoccupation. His expression softened with concern. He stood up and walked over to her, his mind now fully engaged. The politician in him immediately recognized the potential security risk, his wife's identification, keys, and address lost somewhere in the city. But the husband in him saw only her pain. He put a hand on her shoulder, his voice now serious. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Let's figure this out." The phone call from Officer Russo was patched through to the mayor's chief of staff, a sharp, efficient woman named Amelia. As Russo carefully explained the situation, a wave of palpable relief washed through the mayor's residence. The purse was safe. It was at the central precinct, and it had been turned in, with all its contents untouched, by a man named David Grant. While Karen wept with a mixture of relief and gratitude, another scene was playing out back at the station. A young, ambitious local news reporter named Sarah Jenkins was packing up her gear, thoroughly bored. She had just finished a mind-numbingly dull story about city budget cuts and was looking forward to ending her shift. As she passed the front desk, she overheard Officer Russo, who was now speaking in low, serious tones into the phone. Her reporter's ears, always scanning for keywords, snagged on a few distinct phrases: unbelievable integrity, the mayor's wife, and the one that made her stop dead in her tracks: homeless man returned it. Her journalistic instincts, dormant just moments before, ignited like a flash fire. This was it. This was not just a story. It was a narrative. A perfect, powerful human interest piece with a hook that could captivate the entire city. Meanwhile, David, having given his name and a brief, reluctant statement, wanted only to leave. The sterile air of the station felt suffocating, and the newfound respect in Officer Russo's eyes was more unnerving than his earlier contempt. He refused any offer of a reward, shaking his head and backing toward the door. He had done the right thing, and now he just wanted to disappear back into the anonymity that had been his shield for so long. He pushed through the glass doors and stepped out into the cool, damp night. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, creating a blurry, impressionistic scene. He pulled his collar up and began walking, his shoulders hunched, already focused on the immediate problem of finding a safe place to sleep. He never saw the figure who had followed him out. He never heard the faint click. Sarah Jenkins, standing in the shadows of the precinct entrance, quickly and discreetly raised her phone. She snapped a single photo. It was grainy, candid, and perfectly composed by accident. It captured David from the back, a solitary figure walking away from the camera, his worn jacket and weary posture silhouetted against the glittering, indifferent city. It was the photo that was about to go viral. Sarah didn't even wait to get back to the newsroom. She typed out a quick, breathless pitch to her editor on her phone as she walked to her car. Her editor, a veteran newsman who knew a golden story when he saw one, replied in less than a minute. "Run with it. Now." Within the hour, the first online article was published, accompanied by Sarah's grainy, evocative photo. The headline was pure clickbait genius, designed to grab the heart and the imagination. City's forgotten man shows unforgettable integrity. Homeless man returns, mayor's wife's lost purse. The story was live. The digital ripple had been sent out, and as David Grant tried to find a quiet corner to rest his head, a tidal wave of attention was already beginning to build, heading straight for him. The story spread not like a ripple, but like a digital tsunami. Sarah Jenkins's article, launched into the vast ocean of the internet, was the single drop of water that started it all. Within minutes, it was shared by a handful of her followers. Within an hour, it was trending locally in Atlanta. By morning, it had broken containment, flooding social media feeds across the country. The narrative was simply too powerful, too pure to be ignored. In a world saturated with cynicism and division, the story of David Grant was a beacon. A man who possessed nothing, who lived in the shadows of a society that had discarded him, had performed an act of profound, uncomplicated honesty. The grainy photo Sarah had snapped became an instant icon. It was reposted on Instagram with inspirational quotes, shared on Facebook with long emotional captions, and dissected on Twitter under hashtags like Faith in Humanity Restored and Atlanta Hero. News vans, having missed David at the precinct the night before, now camped outside its doors, interviewing a flustered but secretly thrilled Officer Russo, who spoke of David's quiet dignity. The story was a blank canvas onto which an entire city, an entire nation, projected its hopes. People saw in David's silhouette not just a homeless man, but a symbol of the quiet integrity they feared was lost in the world. The public reaction was a tidal wave of emotion. A GoFundMe page, started by a Georgia State University student who had been moved to tears by the article, was created with a modest goal of $5,000, enough to get David off the street for a month or two. The first donation was for $10, then $20. By noon the next day, the total had surpassed $50,000, with donations pouring in from every state. The comments section was a testament to the story's impact. "This man is a king," one wrote. "I was having the worst day, and then I read this." "Thank you, David Grant," wrote another. The mayor's office was completely inundated. The phone lines were jammed with citizens, their voices thick with emotion, demanding that the city do something for this man. Emails flooded the public correspondence server, crashing it twice before noon. The message was unanimous and clear. What was the city of Atlanta going to do for the man who had just become its moral compass? While this storm of attention raged across the digital world, David Grant was in a different universe entirely. He was oblivious. His reality dictated not by trending topics, but by the weather and the gnawing emptiness in his stomach. He had spent the night in a relatively dry spot beneath a highway overpass, the rhythmic roar of traffic overhead a familiar, almost comforting lullaby. The quiet satisfaction he'd felt after leaving the police station was a small, warm coal in his chest, but it did little to ward off the damp chill that seeped into his bones. His focus, as always, was on the immediate, the tangible, the next step in the endless marathon of survival. The next morning, he made his way to a small park a few blocks from his previous night's shelter. The sun was a weak but welcome presence, its rays filtering through the autumn leaves. He sat on a cold metal bench, unwrapping a piece of day, old bread he'd managed to get from a shelter kitchen before they closed. He ate slowly, methodically, making it last. He was watching a group of pigeons squabble over a dropped pretzel when he noticed a woman approaching him. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, dressed in yoga pants and a hoodie, and she held her phone out in front of her like a shield. She stopped a few feet away, her expression hesitant. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft. "I know this is a really weird question, but is this you?" She turned the phone screen towards him. David squinted, his eyes struggling to focus on the small, bright rectangle. And then he saw it. It was a picture of a man from behind, walking away into the city night. He saw the familiar slump of the shoulders, the unmistakable outline of his own worn-out jacket, the very posture of weariness he felt in his own bones. The recognition was not a gentle dawning. It was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked the air from his lungs. It was him. It was undeniably him. But how? Why? A cold dread, far more chilling than the morning air, washed over him. He shook his head, a quick, jerky motion. "No," he mumbled, the word catching in his throat. "Not me." He didn't wait for her response. He scrambled to his feet, stuffing the last of the bread into his pocket, and walked away, his pace quick and uneven. His heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of his ribs. He could feel the woman's confused stare on his back. As he hurried down the path, he saw two other people, a young couple sitting on a nearby bench, look down at their own phones, and then glance up at him, their eyes widening in recognition. One of them whispered to the other, pointing. The whispers felt like shouts. The glances felt like stares. The attention was terrifying. For years, His very survival had been predicated on his ability to be invisible, to blend into the background, to be a ghost that the city looked right through. That invisibility was his armor, his camouflage, his only defense. Now it had been stripped away. He felt naked, exposed, a specimen under a microscope. The label of hero that people were whispering felt like a brand, a target painted on his back, marking him as something he didn't understand and didn't want to be. He was no longer anonymous, and in his world, the loss of anonymity was not a promotion, it was a mortal threat. In the polished, climate-controlled world of the mayor's office, the mood was the exact opposite of David's terror. It was electric. The communications team, led by the mayor's sharp and pragmatic chief of staff, Amelia Vance, was buzzing with an energy that hadn't been felt in months. Charts projected onto a smartboard showed social media engagement metrics soaring into the stratosphere. The name David Grant was generating more positive press for the administration in a single day than their last 6 months of policy initiatives combined. Amelia stood before Mayor Richard Whitmore, her expression triumphant. "Richard, this is a political gift from the heavens," she declared, her voice crisp and confident. "Your approval ratings have been stagnant, the press has been hammering us on the transit strike. This story is pure gold. It's a narrative of compassion, integrity, and redemption happening right here in our city. It paints you, by extension, as the benevolent leader of that city. We can ride this wave all the way to the next election." She began outlining a strategy, a public ceremony on the steps of City Hall, a key to the city, a press conference with every major news outlet. Karen Whitmore, who had been sitting quietly in a chair to the side of her husband's desk, finally spoke. Her voice, though soft, cut through the room's political fervor like a surgeon's scalpel. "This isn't about the election, Amelia." Amelia stopped, turning to Karen with a practiced, patient smile. "Karen, of course, but the political benefits are undeniable." "No," Karen interrupted, her gaze firm. She stood up and walked to the center of the room. "This is about a man who had nothing, who was cold and hungry, and who held my life in his hands. He didn't steal from me. He didn't take advantage. He went out of his way to do the right thing, expecting nothing in return. We owe him a debt, a real one, not a photo op and a hollow gesture." Her words hung in the air, grounding the conversation in a simple, undeniable human truth. She spoke of the worn photograph of her mother, explaining its sentimental value with a raw emotion that silenced the room. Mayor Whitmore looked from his chief of staff's strategic, calculating face to his wife's passionate, sincere one. He was a politician, yes, and his mind instinctively understood and appreciated Amelia's angle. But he was also a husband who had seen his wife's genuine despair and profound relief. He saw the wisdom in Karen's words, and in a moment of clarity, he also recognized that in this unique situation, genuine compassion was the most effective political strategy. The two were not mutually exclusive. They were perfectly aligned. "You're both right," the mayor announced, his voice carrying a new weight of authority. He looked at Amelia. "We will ensure the city sees this, but we will do it the right way." Then, his eyes scanned the room and landed on a junior aide standing near the door. Jessica Morales. She was in her late 20s, sharp, intelligent, and fiercely ambitious. But the mayor had also noted a deep well of empathy in her that was rare in their line of work. She was a rising star, and he knew this was the perfect moment to test her. "Jessica," he said, beckoning her forward. The young woman stepped into the center of the room, her expression alert and focused. "Your new priority is David Grant," the mayor continued, his tone serious. "I want you to handle this personally. Your mission is to find him, talk to him, find out what he needs, what he wants. A real, tangible solution. I don't want a media circus chasing this man down and scaring him away. You will be discreet. You will be respectful. Don't come back to this office until you have a plan, a real plan to help him." Jessica Morales met the mayor's gaze, a flicker of determination in her eyes. She understood the complexity of the task, the delicate balance between a genuine desire to help and the political machine whirring in the background. It was a test, a mission, and a profound responsibility all rolled into one. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'll find him." Jessica Morales began her search with the crisp efficiency that had defined her rapid ascent in the mayor's office. She was a creature of data, of organized lists and digital footprints. Her first stop was the Central Police Precinct, where she presented her City Hall credentials and asked to speak with Officer Russo. The officer was polite but guarded, his brief celebrity having already soured into a weary annoyance. He confirmed the events of the previous night but had no more information to offer. He gave his name, refused a reward, and walked out, Russo said with a shrug. Looked like he just wanted to be left alone. Next, Jessica went to the bus stop on Peachtree Street, a location now logged in her phone's GPS. She stood on the spot where a $500 purse had been dropped, a place that had become the unlikely epicenter of a city-wide phenomenon. She scanned the faces in the crowd, showing David's grainy photo to a hot dog vendor and a few people waiting for the bus. They recognized the picture from the news, but no one had seen the man himself. It was like searching for a ghost. Her initial confidence began to fray at the edges. The city she knew, a network of addresses, phone numbers, and social media profiles, did not exist for David Grant. He had no digital trail, no public records beyond the ghosts of a life lived 2 decades ago. Frustration mounted. She was used to solving problems with a few keystrokes and a series of authoritative phone calls. This was different. This required entering a world she only knew from policy briefings and budget reports. Taking a deep breath, she traded her heels for a pair of flats she kept in her car, shed her blazer, and drove to the first of 3 major homeless shelters on her list. The moment she walked in, she felt like an intruder. The air was thick with the smell of boiled vegetables and damp clothing. The noise was a low, constant hum of conversations, coughs, and the distant clatter of pans from a kitchen. She approached the front desk, where a tired-looking man barely glanced up from his crossword puzzle. She showed him the photo. He squinted at it. "Might have seen him," he said, his voice non-committal. "Lots of guys look like that. Can't help you." At the second shelter, a woman told her flatly, "We don't give out information on our residents. It's a matter of privacy and safety." Jessica tried to explain she was from the mayor's office, that she was there to help, but the word office seemed to build a wall between them. She was the government, and in this world, the government was a force of eviction notices and broken promises, not a source of aid. Her search forced her into the city's hidden corners, the underpasses where makeshift communities huddled, the soup kitchens where men and women stood in silent, patient lines. She saw the systemic failures she had previously only read about, the cracks in the social safety net that had become gaping chasms. The task, initially a career opportunity, began to transform. The abstract concept of the homeless dissolved into the faces of individuals, each with a story etched into the lines on their face. It was at the third and final shelter on her list, a smaller, faith-based outreach center called the Crossroads, that she finally found a flicker of hope. The director was a woman in her late 60s named Eleanor Vance, whose face was a roadmap of compassionate weariness. She had kind, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through Jessica's carefully constructed professional demeanor. Jessica gave her practice speech, but Eleanor held up a hand to stop her. "I know who you're looking for," Eleanor said, her voice soft but firm. "And I know why you can't find him. You're looking for a hero. You're not looking for a man who is scared to death." She gestured for Jessica to follow her into a small, cluttered office. "David has been on the streets for a long time, dear. Survival out there means being invisible. Attention, any kind of attention, is dangerous. It brings cops, it brings predators, it brings trouble. Now, his face is on every television in the city. He's not hiding from a reward, he's hiding from a spotlight that he thinks will burn him." Jessica felt a flush of shame. Eleanor was right. She had been approaching this like a manhunt, not a rescue. "What do I do?" Jessica asked, her voice losing its official edge. "The mayor, his wife, they genuinely want to help him." Eleanor studied her for a long moment. "If you want to find him, you have to stop looking like City Hall. Lose the credentials. Approach him not as an official, but as a person. Don't offer him a program. Offer him a conversation. He's a proud man, a good man. He's just lost his way. I might know a place he'd go to feel safe, a place where no one would think to look." It had become a personal mission. Following Eleanor's hand, drawn map, Jessica found herself in a part of the city she had only ever driven through with her doors locked. It was a desolate landscape of abandoned warehouses and rusting railroad tracks, a graveyard of industry. She parked her car and walked toward an old freight depot, its windows boarded up, its brick facade covered in faded graffiti. The air was still and quiet, the only sound the crunch of broken glass under her feet. And then she saw him. He was huddled in the deep shadow of a loading dock, trying to make himself as small as possible. He had his knees drawn up to his chest, his arms wrapped around them, the picture of a man trying to disappear into himself. He looked exhausted, his face etched with fear and a profound weariness. Jessica's heart ached for him. She remembered Eleanor's advice. She took a slow, deep breath and approached cautiously, her footsteps soft on the gravel. He heard her anyway. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with alarm, and he immediately scrambled to his feet, ready to bolt. "Mr. Grant?" Jessica called out, her voice gentle, holding her empty hands up to show she was not a threat. "David? Please, wait." He froze, poised for flight, his body tense. "Leave me alone," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. "I'm not a reporter," she said quickly, taking another slow step forward. "I'm not the police. My name is Jessica Morales. I work for the mayor." The words mayor and work seemed to confirm his worst fears. He took a step back. "I don't want any trouble," he said, his eyes darting around, looking for an escape route. "I just want to be left alone." "You're not in trouble," Jessica said, her tone earnest and sincere. "It's the opposite of trouble. The mayor and his wife, Karen, they want to thank you, personally. They were so grateful for what you did." David stared at her, his expression a mask of deep ingrained skepticism. He had learned over many hard years that attention from powerful people was never, ever a good thing. It was a prelude to being moved along, to being arrested, to being erased. But there was something in this young woman's voice, a lack of pushiness, a genuine respect that cut through his fear. She wasn't demanding anything. She wasn't chasing him. She was just talking to him, one person to another. He hesitated, his instinct to run warring with a tiny, flickering ember of curiosity. He was so tired of running. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not an official, but a young woman who seemed genuinely concerned. After a long, silent moment that stretched for an eternity, he gave a single, reluctant nod. The ride to City Hall was a surreal journey through a world David had forgotten existed. He sat in the passenger seat of Jessica's clean, quiet car, the scent of new leather filling his nostrils. He watched the city slide by through the window, the familiar, gritty streets looking different from this side of the glass. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if he were a ghost visiting his own life. When they arrived, the building loomed before him, a mountain of granite and marble, a monument to a power and order that had no place for him. Jessica led him through a side entrance, avoiding the main lobby, but the opulence was still overwhelming. The floors were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the light from ornate chandeliers that hung from impossibly high ceilings. The air itself smelled different, clean and cool, with the faint, pleasant scent of lemon polish and old, important paper. Men and women in sharp suits walked with a brisk, purposeful stride, their voices low and confidential. David felt every eye on him, his worn clothes and scuffed boots a declaration of otherness. He hunched his shoulders, trying to shrink, to become invisible again. But here, in the heart of the city's power, his presence was a shout. Jessica led him to a set of large, carved wooden doors and knocked softly. A voice called for them to enter. They stepped into the mayor's private office. It was a vast room, dominated by a massive mahogany desk and a wall of windows that offered a breathtaking panorama of the Atlanta skyline. And standing near the window, turning as they entered, was Karen Whitmore. Her gratitude was not a polite formality, it was an immediate, palpable force. Her face, which David had only seen on a small plastic card, was filled with a sincere, powerful emotion. She crossed the room in a few quick steps, and before David could react, she took his rough, calloused hand in both of her soft ones. "Mr. Grant," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Thank you." She held his hand tightly, her eyes looking directly into his. "You don't know what this meant to me. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the purse. It was this." She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a small, faded photograph with frayed edges. It was the picture of her mother. "You returned a piece of my heart to me. I can never, ever repay you for that." David was stunned into silence. Her sincerity was a wave that washed over him, dismantling the walls of cynicism and fear he had built around himself for years. He could only nod, unable to form words. At that moment, Mayor Richard Whitmore stepped forward, a warm, authoritative smile on his face. "David," he said, using his first name as if they were old friends, "your city is proud of you." As he spoke, the office doors opened again, and a small, select group of reporters and a single television camera crew were ushered inside. The atmosphere shifted in a heartbeat, from intimately personal to glaringly public. The mayor put a firm, fatherly hand on David's shoulder, turning him to face the camera. The sudden brightness of the camera light was blinding. "An act of integrity like the one Mr. Grant has shown us cannot go unrecognized," the mayor announced, his voice resonating with practiced charisma. "It speaks to the true character of our city. And so, on behalf of the people of Atlanta, we want to do more than just say thank you." He paused for dramatic effect, his hand still resting on David's shoulder. "We have arranged for a fully furnished apartment for Mr. Grant, with the first year's rent paid in full. Furthermore, we are offering him a position, starting immediately, in the city's public works and maintenance program, with full benefits." The words echoed in the suddenly silent room. Apartment. Job. The camera flashes began to pop, a series of blinding, disorienting explosions of light. Reporters started shouting questions, their voices a chaotic jumble. David stood frozen, speechless. The concepts were too vast, too life-altering to be processed. It was a lifeline, a resurrection, a future he had long ago accepted he would never have. The sheer, crushing magnitude of the offer, of the lights, of the noise, overwhelmed his senses. He felt the floor tilt beneath his feet, the world dissolving into a blur of bright lights and loud sounds, a man drowning in the sudden, shocking flood of a second chance. The apartment was on the third floor of a modest, clean brick building, one that David had walked past 1,000 times without ever truly seeing. Jessica Morales unlocked the door and pushed it open, the scent of fresh paint and new carpet spilling into the hallway. "Here it is," she said, her voice gentle. To her, it was a simple one. Bedroom unit, standard for the city's housing assistance program. To David, it was a palace. He stepped over the threshold and stopped, his senses overwhelmed. The first thing that struck him was the quiet. It was a profound, deafening silence, broken only by the faint hum of a refrigerator. For years his world had been a cacophony of city noise, of traffic, sirens, shouting, and the constant low-grade hum of human desperation. This silence was a physical presence, a thick blanket that seemed to press in on him from all sides. He took a tentative step forward, his worn boots making no sound on the plush beige carpet. He ran a hand over the smooth, cool surface of the kitchen counter, a simple laminate, but to his fingers it felt like polished marble. He walked into the small kitchen area and stood before the stainless steel sink. Hesitantly, he reached out and turned the faucet. Clean, clear water rushed out with a force that startled him. He turned it off, then on again, just to watch it flow, a seemingly infinite supply of something he had so often craved. In the living room, a simple sofa and armchair were arranged neatly. He didn't sit. He just looked at them. Objects from a life he felt he had no right to inhabit. The bedroom was the most intimidating room of all. A double bed, neatly made with a soft blue blanket, sat in the center. It looked impossibly high, impossibly soft. Jessica gave him a kind smile, handed him a set of keys, and explained that a caseworker would be by in a few days to help with paperwork. Then she was gone, and he was alone. The quiet rushed back in to fill the space she had vacated. For the first few hours he just stood in the middle of the living room, turning in slow circles, taking in the 4 pristine walls that were now his. He felt like a stranger in a museum, afraid to touch anything for fear of breaking it. That night, the silence became his tormentor. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, was magnified into a threat. He tried to sleep in the bed, the soft mattress yielding beneath his weight in a way that felt deeply unsettling. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if he were floating. After an hour of tossing and turning, his heart pounding with a nameless anxiety, he gave up. He took the thin, worn blanket from his own backpack, the one that smelled of wood smoke and city air, and laid it on the floor in the corner of the living room, He lay down, the hard, unyielding surface a familiar comfort against his aching back. Here, in the corner, pressed against the wall, he felt grounded. He was haunted by the profound, unshakable feeling that this was all a mistake, a clerical error, a dream from which he would soon be violently awakened. He stared into the darkness, listening to the alien silence of his new home, and felt more alone than he ever had on a crowded street. His first day on the job began before the sun was fully up. David was at the municipal depot a full hour early, his anxiety a coiled spring in his stomach. He was assigned to a maintenance crew led by a man named Frank, a supervisor in his late 60s with a face like a clenched fist and hands that looked like they were carved from old wood. Frank looked David up and down, his gaze lingering on his clean but still worn clothes. The rest of the crew, a handful of men who had worked together for years, watched him with a mixture of curiosity and undisguised skepticism. They had all seen the news. To them, David wasn't a new colleague. He was the homeless hero, a charity case the mayor had saddled them with. They expected him to be weak, unreliable, and gone within a week. "All right, Grant," Frank grunted, not bothering with pleasantries. "Grab a bucket and some rags. Go clean the graffiti off the north perimeter fence." It was a menial, thankless task, meant to test him. David simply nodded, collected the supplies, and went to work. The fence was a long stretch of chain, link, tagged with layers of spray paint. As he scrubbed at the paint, his mind quieted. The simple, repetitive motion was calming. He worked steadily, methodically. His focus narrowed to the task at hand. After an hour, he had cleared a small section, but the work was slow and grueling. During a short break, he walked the length of the fence and noticed something the others had long ignored. Near the back gate, a section of the fence was badly damaged, the posts bent and the chain, link fabric torn away from the frame, leaving a gaping hole. It was a security risk, an invitation for vandals. He found Frank during the crew's lunch break. "The fence back by the gate is broken," David said quietly. "The posts are bent. It needs more than a cleaning." Frank shot him an annoyed look. "I know it's broken. Getting a new section requisitioned takes 6 months of paperwork. It's been like that for a year." David hesitated for a moment. "I think I can fix it," he said. A few of the other crew members, sitting nearby, snickered. Frank just stared at him. "You think you can fix it?" he asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "With what? Your good intentions?" "With a tension bar, a post driver, and some pliers," David replied, his voice even. "The posts aren't sheared, they're just bent at the base. They can be straightened and reset. The fabric can be stretched and secured." The technical terms, spoken with such quiet confidence, caught Frank off guard. He saw a flicker of something in David's eyes, a deep, practical knowledge that didn't fit the narrative of the helpless man he had imagined. Intrigued despite himself, Frank grunted, "Fine, show me." He led David to a tool shed, and David moved with a newfound purpose, selecting the tools with a familiarity that was startling. He found a heavy-duty a long winch in a dusty corner. Back at the fence, David worked with a precision that silenced the skeptics. He used the winch and a spare post as a lever to carefully straighten the bent metal poles, his movements economical and sure. He drew on skills he hadn't used in 20 years, the muscle memory buried deep in his hands, reawakening. He stretched the chain, link fabric taut, weaving the severed ends back together with a pair of pliers, his fingers moving with a deftness that was mesmerizing to watch. It was hard, physical work, but it felt good. It felt real. By the end of the day, the fence was not just patched, it was whole, as strong and tight as the day it was installed. Frank stood back, arms crossed, and stared at the repair. He walked over and shook the post. It was solid as a rock. He looked at the seamlessly woven fabric. He turned to David, who was quietly wiping grease from his hands with a rag. The skepticism on Frank's face had been replaced by a grudging, profound respect. "Where in the hell did you learn to do that?" he asked, his voice low. David looked at his own hands, then at the fence. "A long time ago," he said softly. Frank just nodded, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He didn't see a hero or a charity project anymore. He saw a craftsman, and for the first time in 2 decades, as he felt the satisfying ache of a day's hard labor in his muscles, David began to feel a flicker of his old self return, a sense of value and purpose that no one had given him, but that he had built with his own two hands. Life settled into a routine, but it was a fragile one. The stability of the apartment and the job was a foundation, but David felt like he was living in a fishbowl. His colleagues at work, though more respectful after the incident with the fence, still peppered him with endless questions about finding the purse, about the mayor, about being homeless. They weren't malicious, just curious, but each question was a reminder of the identity that had been thrust upon him. In his apartment building, people recognized him from the news. Some treated him with an uncomfortable, almost saintly reverence, holding doors for him and speaking in hushed tones as if he were a holy man. Others avoided his gaze, their discomfort a palpable thing in the elevator. He was a living fable, and it prevented him from being just a neighbor. The most painful encounters were with the ghosts from his old life. One afternoon, a man he knew from the shelters, a man named Marcus with whom he had shared many a cold night, confronted him outside the depot. Marcus's eyes were filled with a bitter resentment. "Look at you," he sneered, gesturing at David's clean work clothes. "Got your own little uniform now. You sold out, man. You got lucky, and you forgot all about the rest of us." The accusation stung more than David could have imagined, a sharp, poisoned dart that found its mark. He was caught between two worlds, no longer belonging to the streets, but not yet truly a part of the world he now inhabited. Meanwhile, in the sleek, glass-walled offices of the local news station, Sarah Jenkins was growing restless. Her story on David Grant had been a career, making triumph, but to her cynical journalist's mind, it felt too perfect, too clean. The narrative of the flawless, saintly homeless man was a fairy tale, and she had built her career on exposing the complicated truths behind such tales. She felt her follow-up story was missing a crucial element: the grit, the conflict, the balance that would make it real. Her ambition gnawed at her. She began to dig. She spent hours sifting through public records online, searching for any trace of David Grant before he had become a ghost. At first, she found nothing. But then, by cross-referencing old property records with court filings, she found it. A painful history, laid bare in the cold, impersonal language of legal documents from 20 years prior. She found the record of a small carpentry business, Grant's Woodcraft, that had filed for bankruptcy. She found the subsequent court filing for a personal bankruptcy. Then, a divorce decree, citing irreconcilable differences. Finally, she found a last known address for his ex-wife and a daughter who would now be in her late 20s. He hadn't just lost his way, he had lost everything: a business, a home, a family. A deep, prolonged depression was mentioned in the divorce filings. He had a past, a troubled one. This was the dirt she had been looking for. This was the balance. Sarah began to frame her new story, a sensational exposé she planned to title "The Troubled Past of Atlanta's Homeless Hero." It would explore his failures, his losses, the reasons he had ended up on the street in the first place. It was a much more compelling, much more dramatic story. To make it airtight, she needed a comment from the administration that had championed him. She picked up her phone and dialed the direct line for the mayor's office, asking to speak with Jessica Morales. When Jessica answered, her voice bright and professional, Sarah set her time bomb. "Jessica, Sarah Jenkins here," she said, her tone deceptively casual. "I'm running a follow-up on David Grant. I've uncovered some details about a bankruptcy and his estrangement from his family. I was hoping the mayor's office might have a comment on the troubled history of the man you've held up as a city-wide hero." The line went silent for a moment, and in that silence, the foundations of David's new life began to crack. The silence on the phone line was heavy, a dead weight that Jessica Morales felt in the pit of her stomach. Sarah Jenkins's words, so casually delivered, had detonated a bomb in the quiet of her office. Jessica's first reaction was a hot flash of fury at the reporter's predatory ambition, at the sheer, callous cynicism of it. But her training kicked in immediately, pushing the anger aside. She knew this wasn't a threat, it was a declaration. The story was coming, with or without their comment, she informed the mayor, who argued with his political team about the best way to spin it. It was Jessica who cut through the noise, her voice sharp and clear. "We don't spin this," she argued, Her gaze locked on the mayor. We get ahead of it. We stand by him, unconditionally. If we waver, if we look like we're trying to hide something, we validate her entire narrative. Our support has to be unwavering. The mayor agreed. The task of telling David fell to her. She drove to his apartment building, her own heart heavy with a sense of dread. She found him in his small living room, reading a book from the local library. He looked up and smiled when he saw her, a small, genuine smile that twisted a knife in her gut. She sat down and, as gently as she could, she broke the news. The transformation was devastating to watch. The small light of peace that had begun to kindle in his eyes was extinguished in an instant. The color drained from his face. The shame he had carried like a shroud for 20 years, the shame he thought he might finally be shedding, came rushing back, suffocating him. He physically slumped, the weight of his past failures pressing down on him, his shoulders rounding as if preparing for a blow. He stared at the clean, unmarked wall of his apartment, as if it were already dissolving around him. "I knew it," he whispered, his voice a hollow rasp. "I knew it was too good to be true." His gaze dropped to the floor. "They'll take it all back now. The job, the apartment. They'll see who I really am. A failure." Jessica leaned forward, her voice fierce and low. "Who you really are is the man who returned that purse when you had nothing. Who you really are is the man who shows up for work an hour early every single day and does the job of 3 people. That past is a part of your story, David. It isn't the whole story." But her words barely seemed to register. He looked toward the door, his eyes distant and haunted. Jessica could see the thought forming in his mind as clearly as if he had spoken it aloud. He was considering running. Disappearing back into the familiar, anonymous pain of the streets seemed so much easier than facing this new, public humiliation. The silence he had once found so deafening now seemed like a sanctuary he was about to lose all over again. When Jessica informed Karen Whitmore, the mayor's wife did not react with political calculation, but with pure, unadulterated fury. "That woman is a vulture," Karen said, her voice trembling with rage. She immediately got Sarah Jenkins's personal number and called her directly. The conversation was short and brutal. Sarah was polite, professional, and utterly immovable. The story was in the public interest, she argued, and she would not be backing down. After hanging up, Karen's hands were shaking. She looked at Jessica, her eyes blazing. "If she wants a story, we'll give her one." Without consulting her husband's political team, Karen drafted a statement and released it directly to the Associated Press. It was a passionate, fiery defense of David Grant and a direct rebuke of Sarah's brand of journalism. "Mr. Grant's past struggles do not diminish his character, they amplify it," the statement read. "His integrity is not admirable in spite of his past, but because of it. He knows what it is to lose everything, which makes his choice to return what was not his all the more profound. This city should be defined by how it offers second chances, not by how it tears down those who are trying to rebuild." The statement was a bombshell. Meanwhile, at the city worksite, the rumors had already started to circulate, whispered over coffee and lunchboxes. During the afternoon break, one of the younger crew members, a man named Tony, sidled up to David with a smirk. "Heard you used to be some kind of big shot before you lost it all," he said, his voice loud enough for others to hear. "Guess it's true what they say. The bigger they are, the harder they fall." David flinched as if struck. He said nothing, just stared at the ground, the familiar shame washing over him. Before he could retreat into himself, another voice cut through the air, low and dangerous as grinding gravel. "Shut your mouth, Tony." It was Frank. The gruff supervisor walked over, his face set like stone. He got right in Tony's face, his presence radiating an authority no one dared to challenge. "The man's work is what matters here," Frank growled, his voice a low rumble. "And his work is better than any of yours. You got a problem with him. You got a problem with me." He stared Tony down until the younger man mumbled an apology and scurried away. Frank then turned to David. He didn't say anything soft or sentimental. He just looked him in the eye and gave a short, sharp nod, a gesture of absolute, unconditional loyalty. David was stunned. This simple act of solidarity from a man he barely knew, a man who had every reason to resent him, was like a steel brace being clamped around his spine. It was a surge of strength so potent it almost brought him to his knees. Bolstered by the twin pillars of Karen's public defense and Frank's private loyalty, David made a choice. He would not run. He would not hide. That evening, he called Jessica. "I'll talk to her," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But not in an office. Not on her terms. On mine." The meeting was set for the following afternoon at a small, quiet park, a neutral ground of grass and trees. When Sarah Jenkins arrived, notebook and recorder in hand, she found David sitting on a simple wooden bench, watching the ducks on a small pond. He was not the broken man she had expected. He was quiet, calm, and possessed a dignity that was unnerving. He didn't wait for her questions. He just began to speak, his voice even, his gaze fixed on the water. "Yes, I failed," he said, his words simple and unadorned. "I lost my business, a business I built with my own hands, and then I lost my way. I was drowning in shame, and I pushed everyone away. I lost my family because of my own pride and my own shame. I can't change that. For 20 years I've lived with that every single day." He paused, turning to look at her for the first time, his eyes clear and direct. "But what I did a few weeks ago, when I found that purse, that was me, too. The man who works for the city now, who fixes what's broken. That's me. I'm not a hero, and I'm not just a failure. I'm just a man trying to do the right thing today. And tomorrow, I'm going to get up and try to do it again." His profound, unvarnished honesty was more powerful than any exposé. It disarmed Sarah completely. There was no scandal to uncover, only the quiet, painful, resilient truth of a human life. Her follow-up story, which she had intended to be a dramatic takedown, became something else entirely. It told the whole story, the failure and the redemption, and it generated a massive, unprecedented wave of public support for David. The narrative shifted overnight. He was no longer the one-dimensional, homeless hero. He was a symbol of something far more real and inspiring, a story of human resilience, of the quiet battle to rebuild a life one day at a time. 6 months later, the city had largely moved on to other headlines, but David Grant's life had been quietly, fundamentally transformed. He was now a senior member of Frank's crew, his skills as a craftsman fully reawakened. He was a mentor to the younger workers, his quiet competence earning him a deep and abiding respect. He had saved enough money from his paychecks to buy a few new tools of his own, a beautiful set of wood chisels and a modern lightweight level. They were his most prized possessions, symbols of a future he was building himself. The final scene of his old life's chapter closed on a Saturday afternoon. He was back at the crossroads, the shelter where Jessica had first found him, but this time he was not there for a meal or a bed. He was volunteering, using his skills to repair a crumbling section of a brick wall near the entrance. As he worked, he saw a young man, no older than 20, huddled in a corner, his eyes filled with the same lost, terrified look David knew so well. He saw himself. He put down his trowel, walked over, and sat on the ground a few feet from the young man. He didn't offer pity. He didn't make a grand speech. He just waited until the young man looked up. Then, David picked up a spare hammer from his toolbox and held it out. "Here," David said, his voice gentle but firm. "Let me show you how to fix this." He had written a long, painful, honest letter to his estranged daughter, and to his shock, she had written back. They were planning to meet for coffee the following week. His life was not a fairy tale. It was not a perfect, seamless story. But it was his. It was a life rebuilt, not by a single grand gesture from a powerful mayor, but by 1,000 small, steady, honorable actions, a future he was finally, proudly, building with his own 2 hands.